Russia's intention is to maintain its position and to freeze the conflict. And this is what's taking place in Ukraine and, unfortunately, other countries as well. It is the intention of Russia's president to continue making an impact on the future fate of Ukraine. Certainly, he is not aware of the attachment of Ukraine to the Western world. He's currently running an offensive in Syria, and he may not open a battlefront in all the locations. Still, if he doesn't want to conquer following lands, because he's already conquered Crimea, it is definitely his intention to maintain the status quo so that it lasts as it is right now. And what the international community should do is not accept what has been done, either Crimea, what happened there, or the reality in the East, which is harmful for Ukraine and hence for Europe, for all of Europe. And therefore, the Normandy framework remains very valuable and useful still, because it enables justifying to the European Council the extension of the sanctions that were imposed. My concern over the recent years that have passed is that at some point there will be a division between Europeans, that some will start requiring that the sanctions be lifted. But once we have the roadmap, the Minsk protocol, and if it's not effectively implemented, we're looking at all the conditions that are needed to maintain the sanctions. Someone could ask whether they are in fact effective. Yes, indeed, it is a reasonable question to ask. They are reasonable, they are effective, because if they were in place, nobody, especially in Russia, would be asking for the removal of these sanctions. They are harmful for European countries, also for France. I will get back to that. But they are also effective because they penalize Russian economy as well, and the people who are accountable for the breach of law. France, and I advocated that. I wanted to extend the sanctions to energy as well. In my opinion, this would have been most effective as an action against Russia. And some countries, and I will not point my finger, but not wanting to offend anybody, also in my current capacity, some countries that are very much linked to Russia, especially from the energetic point of view, did not want these sanctions to be extended, and that never happened. But from the French point of view, it was unacceptable for France to deliver weapons and armaments to Russia. It is true that an agreement was concluded, decided upon by my predecessor and President Putin, on delivering 2 Mistral vessels. For those of you who are not familiar with the armaments, they are helicopter-carrying vessels that might be useful or could be used by Russia in the Ukrainian crisis against Ukraine. So a demand was made to nullify those delivery of those Mistral vessels, to cancel those deliveries, even though the contracts had been finalized by then. And the sanctions then did not really concern the delivery of military equipment, but this triggered a financial impact of around 1 billion euros for France, because that was the value of the contract. However, I took the decision, even though I was still involved in the Normandy format discussions, and I really wanted a global agreement to be concluded. Still, I made the decision to cancel that contract, and ultimately it was completely cancelled in August 2015, which was after the Minsk agreement. So let me conclude here. If we want the agreements to be followed, if we want the law to be respected, if we want especially Russia to contribute to solving the problems that it caused itself and the conflicts that it initiated, we need to get well equipped with measures, and those measures are discussion, dialogue, negotiation, diplomacy. But other measures are also forceful measures, such as sanctions, non-delivery of equipment, breaking some energy contracts, and sometimes military measures. We need to be aware that only force may lead to political agreements. If there is no force, then politics will encounter a border very soon. And I think that the Minsk agreement corresponds to what was necessary to be done at the time, but their implementation definitely requires will on the part of the Europeans to complete all the measures so that Ukraine can regain its territorial integrity. Thank you very much for your attention.
And concerning sanctions, of course they have their limits, they are well known, but they are also insufficient. Let's be frank. The only sanction which would hurt Russia is the energy policy. The ability of Russia to sell its oil and gas. And who is buying it? We all know. So if we just stopped buying oil and gas from Russia, we would create an extremely difficult, if not impossible, situation for the Russian authorities. So do we want to go that far? After all, there are other countries which produce oil and gas. But we see very well that in Europe it's very difficult to arrive at this result. So that's why I mentioned French exports of armaments, which is important for our industry. So we step back from selling Mistrals to Russia, and we must recognize that we also have economic interests in Russia. But if we want to exert pressure, we should go that far as to be effective. Looking at Syria, Putin has achieved destabilizing our allies. And we see that he is also undermining stability among our countries, which we see currently in Britain. So we can see that there is strong support for Russia also in Europe. Putin has relations with all populist extreme parties in Europe. So we should be able also ideologically and politically to resist Russia and to apply sanctions to the level adequate to the threat.